They were, for example, in one hospital in Ginger. There was no electricity. The generators had stopped working, so they were using torches to be able to see what they were doing. They were having to use a tremendous amount of chemical because, of course, some of the cleanliness was a struggle to keep up. And, of course, there was no air conditioning, so the heat was just extraordinary. And I got to see them working in these conditions and working on conditions that they probably wouldn't have to have dealt with in any other country, because in the UK, these would have been dealt with months before they get to the serious nature that you would see in these hospitals. I also got to speak to the physicians themselves to find out what it was that motivated them to give up their time, to travel halfway across the world to help other people. And it, again, was humbling to hear their stories of how important it was for them to be able to give and give back to people who had such humble beginnings. For me, my job was easy. I would stand on rafts and tell the story. But of course, there was only a camera crew of 3 of us. Pfizer, who was the co-producer, there was Greg, the cameraman, and me. So yes, I did have to also carry the equipment as well. So it's not all glamour, you know, being a TV presenter. But seriously, thinking about the work that physicians across continents do, you have to think about the stories of the people who they help. Stories like Matsula. Let me tell you about Matsula. We were filming on the last day in Kampala. They had finished every operation. The physicians were ready to go home. And you imagine how difficult it is to have to close that gate as people keep appearing because the word has got out. They've traveled from all over the city and far beyond to come to the hospital where they've heard that physicians across continents are doing miracles for other individuals. Unfortunately, that gate did have to close. And that's the point that Matsula arrived. Now, Matsula had, as you can see, a goiter on the side of her neck. Now, this is a goiter which in the UK would never have got bigger than a golf ball before it was treated. But here in Uganda, Matsula couldn't afford any treatment, so it got bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point it was the size, when we saw her, of a small melon. She had had that goiter for 8 years. Matsula was also HIV positive. The doctors came by and saw her, and one had just popped out for something to eat and came back and saw Matsula at the gate and said, "You know what? Come in." I mean, you couldn't have even written this in a script in a drama. This was actually real. This was happening. And Matsula was brought in, and within an hour, she was under general anesthetic and she was being treated. It was a 2-hour operation, and I watched the intricate work that the physicians were doing. You could see how close I am there to watching. At this particular point, the physician is telling me, "We're cutting very carefully here because these are her vocal cords. And if we make the smallest mistake, she'll never be able to speak." It was just mesmerizing. 2 hours they performed this operation. The remarkable thing was, the next day we went back. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. We wanted to see how Matsula was. We said, "How is she?" The hospital was empty. There was no one there. Just a few of the nurses. We said, "Well, where is everybody? What's happened?" They said, "Well, they've gone." That's what happens here in Uganda. They don't stay for days. They have their operation and leave. But they did say that Matsula had made a complete recovery. She was again packed off with a load of medication to see her well, and she was on her way home, like all the other people that physicians across continents treated that particular week. And if I think about that team as we said goodbye to them from that hospital, I was just immensely proud that I had the opportunity to talk to them, to see alongside them, to see the work that they did, and the literally hundreds of people during that week that they helped. Not just to help transform their lives, but in many cases to save their lives. People like Nabire, people like Matsula, and so many others. So again, in the words of Professor Sharif that you heard earlier on, please do. My job is to help spread the word of what I saw. So I hope that you will see these pictures and help tell that story and keep it going so we can send more doctors out there, more physicians, and make more people's lives very different to the way they are today. Thank you very much.
Alistair, really powerful, and it really brings home exactly the work that they do. But I can imagine, behind the scenes when the cameras aren't rolling, as you mentioned, what are our beneficiaries, our patients, our brothers and sisters who are getting this help? What are they going through when they first come? Many of them probably haven't even set foot in a hospital. I can only imagine the anxiety, the concerns they have, and then, of course, the conditions that the doctors are actually working under. I'm sure you have to use generators sometimes. What happens if that goes out? The pressure that must be upon these doctors, even though they're obviously very senior, very well trained. What's it like, that kind of 360-degree look from the patient coming in and then the actual staff, and how difficult it is for them to actually do that job?
I go back to Ginger Hospital, which we didn't show there, the one where the generators broke and whatever. And anybody who stays in the hospital overnight, the very limited nurses, so the families are out in the gardens cooking meals and looking after their families who are inside being treated. I think the thing that's the most amazing is the overwhelming sense of calm. People are just appreciative, and they... You know what it's really humbling is the expectation of these people is so low. They don't expect anything. They're just incredibly grateful for anything that's given to them. Everything's very quiet, it's very peaceful, it's very calm. And of course, you can imagine all the emotions that they must be going through and the immense gratitude they have when they leave. But they come in quietly, they get on with being looked after, and they just gently leave, and incredibly respectful of each other, everybody around them. There's no pushing, there's no shoving. I mean, they could teach us a lesson or two about how to be respectful of our medical profession, because they are just extraordinary. And as I said, their expectation is low, but fortunately, physicians across continents are able to make a difference way beyond most of them would ever think of.
Which kind of leads me on to just one final question, which is, what's one lesson that you personally have taken away from what you've witnessed, what you've experienced? How has it changed you?
I think it's given me a sense of perspective. It's when you see it firsthand. We were talking before dinner, when you get the sights, the smells, you get every sense that you have is alerted to what's going on around you. And that sense of perspective and that sense of wanting to tell everybody what's happening so that people realize how much of a difference it makes. And a small difference to us is an unbelievable difference to them.
Yeah.
And for me to be able to spread the word, it's just a very small part that I can play to help their lives be transformed.
Well, thank you so much for your service. Thank you so much for bringing this to us, making those documentaries, because that's the first stage. People need to know, people need to be aware, and you've certainly made me aware, and I'm sure you've made all of us aware here. So we ask God to continue to give you the strength to be able to do this wonderful work that you do. Thank you so much, Alistair.
Thank you.
Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So now we've got to that stage in the evening. This is going to be very short, because I don't think there's much that I need to say at this point. I think you all realize, how many fundraising dinners have you all been to? Too many. You've probably been to more dinners than days that you've been alive. We've been to so many. And we have helped, inshallah, thousands of people all across the world. But I've never been to a fundraising dinner. I've never had the opportunity to do what we can do today. And I go back to the words of our chairman at the beginning, that yes, we've got all these organizations that are doing all this